I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Mr. President, President of the International Court of Justice, distinguished delegates, I would first like to extend my sincere appreciation to the President Donahue for her dedicated leadership and informative report on the court activities over the past year. Japan commends the members of the court and the registry for their contributions to the effective and efficient functioning of the court. Mr. President, in January this year, as President of the Security Council, Japan convened an open debate on the theme of the rule of law among nations. And President Donahue and Professor Akande of the University of Oxford both kindly provided very insightful briefings to the law, relating to the role of ICJ in promotion of the rule of law among nations. In her briefing in January, President Donahue mentioned 1970 Friendly Relations Declaration, and this declaration was adopted by this Assembly after long and difficult discussion among member states in 1960s. This was a time when many newly independent states joined the United Nations, and the power balance in the Assembly changed dramatically. As President Donahue pointed out in her briefing in January, a central objective of the Assembly in adopting the declaration was to promote rule of law among nations, and particularly the universal application of the principle embodied in the Charter. The declaration also said, quote, "The faithful observance of the principle of international law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states and the fulfillment of, in good faith of the obligations assumed by states in accordance with the Charter is of the greatest importance for the maintenance of international peace and security." End quote. As the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, ICJ can play a significant role in interpreting and applying the basic principles of UN Charter, which are essential for the maintenance of international peace and security. Such principles naturally include prohibition of use of force under Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter. In the War Advisory Opinion, ICJ found that the illegality of the acquisition of territory by force is a corollary of the prohibition of use of force incorporated in the United Nations Charter, and it reflects customary international law. In view of the recent developments in international relations, ICJ's role in the maintenance of international peace and security is particularly important in interpreting and applying rules relating to the acquisition of territory by force. As we all remember, before World War II, powerful states competed to acquire territory by force, and this rule should provide important safeguard against return to rule by force. Mr. President, President Donahue pointed out in her briefing in January that at the international level, the concept of rule of law is in a constant battle with competing tendencies. But she also rightly argued that it is not the time for the rule of law to wave the white flag of surrender. If we are not waving the white flag of surrender for the rule of law, we should discuss ICJ's role in interpreting and applying the basic principles of international UN Charter. In considering the ICJ's role for maintenance of international peace and security, another important General Assembly resolution should be recalled, which is the Manila Declaration on the Peaceful Settlement of International Disputes, which was adopted in 1982. In adopting this declaration, this Assembly reaffirmed the need to exert utmost efforts in order to settle any conflicts and disputes between states exclusively by peaceful means, and to avoid any military action and hostilities, which can only make more difficult the solution of those conflicts and disputes. And this declaration drew states' attention to the role of ICJ in the settlement of legal disputes. Mr. President, in his briefing in January, Professor Akande pointed out that only 73 out of 193 states had made declarations recognizing the compulsory jurisdiction of ICJ, and said increased acceptance of the jurisdiction of the ICJ and other tribunals would mark an important advance in the rule of law and contribute to the maintenance of peace. In 2019, Japanese government cooperated with Oxford scholars in their study on the state acceptance of ICJ jurisdiction. If you look at the list of cases brought before ICJ, many rely on several rather familiar conventions. And while they are all very important cases, increased acceptance of the ICJ jurisdiction should strengthen its role and mark an important advance in the rule of law. Japan also understands this is easier said than done, as adverse judicial decisions often cause heavy pressure at home. However, when international peace and security is seriously at stake, states should pause and give some thought to the potential role of ICJ. Japan sincerely hopes member states that have not made declaration under Article 36, paragraph 2 of the ICJ statute consider doing so for the settlement of dispute not covered by other relevant dispute settlement mechanisms, in particular in relation to the issues that are likely to affect international peace and security. A state accepting ICJ jurisdiction over relevant legal issues is unlikely to resort to forcible measures, which are difficult to justify under international law in advancing their interest. Therefore, the acceptance of this legally binding dispute settlement mechanism works as a deterrent against unlawful forcible measures and contribute to the maintenance of international peace and security. On the other hand, if a state resorts to forcible measures difficult to justify under international law and rejects a legally binding dispute settlement, that state cannot claim to be a faithful observer of international law. Even in the absence of existing ICJ jurisdiction based on the declaration under ICJ statute or treaties providing for the ICJ jurisdiction, the Security Council may recommend appropriate procedures or methods of adjustment, including utilization of ICJ, in accordance with Article 36 of the Charter. It should be remembered that this provision was used 76 years ago. In 1947, the Security Council made a recommendation to refer to the ICJ under Article 36 in dealing with the Korfu Channel case. Mr. President, in conclusion, I reiterate Japan's steadfast support for the role of the ICJ in maintaining and strengthening the rule of law as a principal judicial organ of the United Nations. Japan is determined to continue its effort to promote the rule of law among nations for the maintenance of international peace and security. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant.
I thank the representative of Japan. I now give the floor to the representative of Germany.
Mr. President, in the face of ever-growing complexities and challenges to the international community, international law remains of paramount importance in order to provide the guardrails for a just world. In times like these, the International Court of Justice is more than ever indispensable as an institution. As the principal legal body of the United Nations, the Court provides states with the means for the peaceful settlement of disputes, and Germany would like to thank you, Madam President Donoghue, both for your report and your great contribution to the Court in the past years. Together with other central judicial institutions, such as the International Criminal Court, the International Court for the Law of the Sea, and the Permanent Court of Arbitration, the ICJ represents a major guardian of the international legal order. The number of cases before the ICJ has steadily increased. Currently, 20 cases are on the docket of the court. This is an encouraging development and shows the ICJ's enormous prestige, weight, and responsibility. Allow me to briefly address a few cases that, to Germany, are of particular significance. Firstly, the case of Ukraine versus Russia on allegations of genocide. Upholding the integrity of the Genocide Convention and rebutting attempts to justify an illegal aggression under the pretext of false allegations of genocide is of paramount importance to Germany. Germany has a specific interest in upholding the integrity of the Genocide Convention, not least in view of Germany's own past. We have therefore decided to intervene in these proceedings, as have 31 other state parties of the Genocide Convention. The unprecedented extent of participation clearly speaks to the interest of the parties to the Genocide Convention in its interpretation. We are grateful to the Court for the opportunity to present our views in view of the proper construction of the Genocide Convention in this case. Secondly, for the first time, the Court has been called upon the General Assembly to give an advisory opinion on the obligations of states in respect of climate change. To address the impacts of climate change requires collective action and international cooperation. More than ever, we need solutions on a large scale. Thus, to us, it is only consequent that the ICJ, with its legal authority, should weigh in and clarify our thinking on how far existing legal obligations in this field reach. Clarity and certainty on the applicable rules can help us in our endeavor to address climate and security challenges. Germany will therefore submit a written statement to the Court in these proceedings in order to support the Court in its important work. Thirdly, Germany is closely following the developments in the application of the Genocide Convention, the case brought by Gambia against Myanmar. We wish to commend Gambia for having brought the matter before the Court. Germany, furthermore, welcomes the decision of the Court of 22nd July on the admissibility of the case based on allegations erga omnes partes. It is our deepest felt conviction that grave human rights violations, wherever they occur, must be addressed. Germany has therefore announced that we will intervene in these proceedings at an appropriate time. Where human rights conventions provide for the ICJ's jurisdiction, the ICJ has a vital role to play in order to ensure the correct application and interpretation of those norms. In this context, Germany will also closely follow the case brought by Canada and the Netherlands against Syria earlier this year on the basis of the Convention Against Torture. Mr. President, finally, it is imperative that states, where they have accepted the jurisdiction of the Court, comply with its rulings. Orders on provisional measures, too, are binding under international law. Hence, we urgently call upon the Russian Federation to abide by the Court's order of 16th March 2022 and to cease its aggressions against Ukraine, a fellow member of the United Nations. The increase of the number of cases before the Court is a welcome development. At the same time, Germany appreciates that the growing workload also poses challenges to the Court's capacities. Challenges that the Court has shown to be capable to meet. We are all, however, called upon to ensure that the same holds true in the future. The ICJ is the main instrument for a peaceful settlement of disputes between states. Let us make sure we maintain and protect it together. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie la représentante.
I thank the representative of Germany.
The 9,452nd meeting of the Security Council is resumed. The provisional agenda for this meeting is Women and Peace and Security, Women's Participation in International Peace and Security, from Theory to Practice. The agenda is adopted. I wish to remind all speakers to limit their statements to no more than 4 minutes in order to enable the Council to carry out its work expeditiously. Flashing lights on the colors of the microphones will prompt speakers to bring their remarks to a close after 4 minutes. I now give the floor to the representative of Belgium.
At the outset, let me highlight that Belgium fully supports the statements of the European Union and the Group of Friends on Women, Peace and Security. Chair, as you indicated in your report, over 2 decades into the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, the full and equal and meaningful participation of women in building and sustaining peace should be the norm and not an afterthought. Unfortunately, progress in this field is slow, uneven, and insufficient, and more concrete action is needed. Allow me to elaborate on 3 points in this regard. First, Belgium fully agrees that women's equal participation in decision-making and realization of the human rights of women and girls are interlinked and mutually reinforcing. Women's economic empowerment, equal access to quality education, the realization of sexual and reproductive health and rights, the fight against negative stereotypes, and many more concrete measures and actions are needed to eliminate each and every structural obstacle preventing women from participating in public life and decision-making. And vice versa, women are essential in decision-making on peace and conflict resolution to reach sustainable solutions for all. Faced with a global rise in misogyny and anti-gender movements, Belgium calls on everyone to strengthen collaboration towards the realization of gender equality, both in peace and conflict settings, as a prerequisite and cornerstone for the implementation of the WPS agenda. Second, the widespread attacks and reprisals against women human rights defenders in conflict settings continue, while also women journalists, women peace builders, and women leaders, be it in conflict settings or not, face harassment, threats, hate speech, and disinformation. The significant scale, nature, and impact of offline and online gender-based violence against women human rights defenders and women leaders require much more strategic and concerted action. In this regard, Belgium welcomes the strengthened support by UN peacekeeping and special political missions to women human rights defenders and calls for increased engagement with women leaders to amplify their message and increase their security. Finally, my country regrets the investment and financing gaps preventing the implementation of the WPS agenda, as well as the lack of progress in the funding of local women's rights and women-led organizations. They are a driving force behind the WPS agenda, play an essential role in the consolidation of sustainable peace, and deserve all our recognition and support, which is why Belgium is proud to support the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund and calls on other countries to do the same. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Belgium for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I thank the Brazilian presidency for convening this important debate as we mark the anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325. This resolution has been a significant milestone, not only in highlighting women's participation in international peace and security, but also in addressing the disproportionate impact of armed conflicts on women. Thanks to the implementation of the Women, Peace and security agenda, there has been deeper awareness on the asymmetric impact of conflict on women. And yet, women and girls in various parts of the world continue to suffer immensely as conflicts intensify. The situation in the Middle East, addressed by the Security Council this week, as well as Ukraine, Afghanistan, Sudan, and other regions indicate how the advances of the women, peace and security agenda can easily be rolled back. As the humanitarian toll in Gaza is rising, women and girls have been gravely impacted. Thousands have been either killed, widowed, or displaced. Pregnant women in Gaza are unable to access safe hospitals. We express our profound concern over the fact that sexual violence, a dreadful violation of human dignity, has become a regular tactic in times of armed conflict. And too often, women are excluded from efforts to prevent and resolve conflicts. Mr. President, I wish to highlight our priorities. First of all, to ensure the success of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, we need to address the core issues causing inequality and protect the human rights of women and girls. We also need to strengthen the global response to the horrific acts perpetrated against women and girls in conflict situations. We must urge the implementation of international humanitarian law under all conditions. Moreover, we must ensure women's full and meaningful participation as active agents in the prevention and resolution of conflicts. We welcome that women's engagement in peace building and peacekeeping will be central to the new agenda for peace. Last but not least, it's crucial that we incorporate a gender perspective into the training of security personnel, both at national and international levels. Mr. President, Turkey actively promotes the implementation of the Resolution 1325 in international platforms, including the UN, OEC, and NATO. Turkey has contributed to the development of NATO policies in the context of Women, Peace and Security agenda. We continue to implement gender-responsive training for security personnel deployed domestically, as well as the NATO mission Iraq, KFOR, and other peacekeeping missions. We support the protection and empowerment of women and girls in conflict or post-conflict situations. As the largest refugee hosting country, Turkey continues to make every effort to support women and girls who fled Syria. And we sincerely hope that this will enable Syrian women to participate in the rebuilding of post-conflict Syria. Mr. President, in closing, I'd like to express our gratitude to the women peacekeepers around the world for their service. My country will continue to advocate Women, Peace and Security agenda, and I thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkey for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Germany.
Mr. President, first of all, let me thank Brazil for hosting this important open debate today, and of course to the briefers for their contributions. Germany aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union, by the Group of Friends of Women, Peace and Security, and by Chile on behalf of the FFP+ group. At the outset, let me shortly revert to the current crisis in the Middle East. Our thoughts are with all those that have fallen victim or that have been hurt or traumatized by the terrorist attacks on Israel. Our thoughts are also with those suffering from the current humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Again, women and children are amongst those hardest hit, which underlines the importance of today's debate. 23 years after the adoption of Resolution 1325, there should really be no need to justify why women should be included in peace processes on an equal footing. The evidence is clear. Peace processes without an adequate representation of women and marginalized groups are more likely to fail. It is therefore in everybody's self-interest to finally remove the obstacles for a full, equal, meaningful and safe participation of women and girls in peacemaking, peace building, and peacekeeping. However, the report of the Secretary General on Women, Peace and Security paints a bleak picture of the current state of implementation of the WPS agenda. One fact speaks for itself. Of 18 peace agreements concluded in 2022, only one was signed by a representative of women's organizations. I think we need a radical shift now, As stated in the new Agenda for Peace, we must take concrete action to challenge and transform gender norms, value systems, and institutional structures that perpetuate exclusion. Improving inclusiveness is one of the core pillars of Germany's feminist foreign policy. Germany wants quantitative and qualitative changes. We not only need peace processes to consider the needs of women and marginalized groups, we need women to participate at every stage of peace processes, including the decision-making. Mr. President, Germany remains a committed supporter of the WPS agenda. Only yesterday night, we pledged an additional 10 million to the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, on which we are already the largest donor. In May 2023, so this year, Germany co-hosted the Global Women's Forum for Peace and Humanitarian Action. 90 civil society representatives from 29 countries joined and adopted the Berlin Declaration. It contains very specific recommendations for action to strengthen the influence and the capacity of women in peace and humanitarian action. And in the same vein, for many years, Germany supports regional women's networks like the African Women Leaders Network or the UNIDAS network. Mr. President, last but not least, the Security Council needs to ensure accountability for crimes that are specifically targeting women and children. In Resolution 2467, this Council committed itself to more robust action against sexual violence and conflict. We urge the Council to take more action in this regard. In conclusion, the Women, Peace and Security agenda remains a priority for Germany and the UN. You can count on our unwavering support in putting it into action. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Germany for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, Sierra Leone welcomes the convening of the open debate on the topic, Women's Participation in International Peace and Security, from Theory to Practice. We also thank the UN Secretary General and the other briefers for the comprehensive insights on the WPS agenda, with a specific call for concerted global efforts to do more for effective implementation of commitments. Sierra Leone takes note of the report of the United Nations Secretary General, which provides updates on implementation of the agenda over the past year and underscores the need for all stakeholders to redouble efforts for a radical shift in women's meaningful participation in peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building. The Women, Peace and Security agenda is an imperative for the government of Sierra Leone and a priority as we soon commence our tenure as an elected member of the United Nations Security Council for the 2024-2025 term. This is informed by our experience as the women in Sierra Leone were very instrumental in the effort that led to peace in Sierra Leone following a decade of civil conflict. Women remain a key part of rebuilding the country at the end of the Civil War 20 years ago. Sierra Leone believes that conflicts continue to have debilitating consequences on the lives and livelihoods of women and girls wherever they occur. Therefore, the participation of women in peacemaking and peace-building efforts is compelling. In our national context and following the paradigm of women exerting influence on peace process globally, the women peace builders in Sierra Leone from all economic and social structures came together with one resolve to achieve lasting peace. The women in Sierra Leone created the Women's Forum, and it became one of the chief advocates for a return to civilian rule and democratic elections in Sierra Leone. The women's movement, which included the Sierra Leone Women's Movement for Peace, joined the Women's Forum and had a primary objective to restore peace in Sierra Leone. From advocacy in the National Consultative Conferences, known as Bintuman 1 and 2 in 1996, to peace rallies, the women of Sierra Leone fought hard to achieve peace in Sierra Leone from one peace process to the next. As a result of the women's intervention, a negotiated peace settlement became a respectable option that offered both government and warring factions the opportunity to climb down from entrenched positions without loss of face. Much like women peacemakers and builders everywhere, their activism was relentless, even when they were barely supported, recognized, or acknowledged. The women's movement collective action that grew out of the civil war in Sierra Leone included taking the agenda of peace to the government and warring factions. They shaped the Women, Peace and Security agenda even before the Security Council had a name for it. The forum critically succeeded in opening up public discourse on contentious issues and articulating a politically non-partisan female perspective in the peace process. The gender perspective, as described in the present context, had a major influence in the political transition on the transitional justice mechanisms. This led to an apology given by the head of state to women victims of the 10-year civil war as part of the Truth and Reconciliation process. With the apology, Sierra Leone took this important symbolic step as a fundamental reparation measure for the wrong done to the women of Sierra Leone. The Special Courts for Sierra Leone also focused on sexual and gender-based violence, owing in part to the gender perspective in the peace process, reinforcing the peace with justice paradigm. The Sierra Leone Court was in fact the first international criminal court to recognize the new crime against humanity of forced marriage as an other inhuman act. Mr. President, the voice that was regained by the women of Sierra Leone in the peace processes has been sustained in the post-conflict phase, peace building, democratic governance, and pursuit of sustainable development. With our first-hand experience of the importance of meaningful participation of women in peace processes, we came to realize that investing in women's participation for peaceful resolution of conflict is critical to the maintenance of peace and security everywhere. Sierra Leone has therefore shown demonstrable commitment in tackling barriers to the deployment of women in its peace operations mission. There is good faith endeavor to expand training and meaningful participation of women within the security services. There has been significant progress in women's participation in the military, and specific police units have been formed to address gender issues. With the passage of the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment legislation in Sierra Leone, we have concretized the aspiration to accelerate women's full, equal, and meaningful participation at all levels and in all governance processes, including an international peace and security as the surest path to stability and prosperity. Mr. President, Sierra Leone has maintained its high commitment to the WPS agenda as part of our contribution to the international community. Sierra Leone is on record to have submitted to the African Union its consolidated resource framework on the WPS agenda, a report that is now being used as a model for other countries, particularly at the level of the ECOWAS sub-region, through lessons learned on information sharing relating to the WPS agenda. Sierra Leone serves as a board member of the Compact on Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action, and in our tenure as a member of the Security Council, we will also sign the WPS shared commitments. In the context of the United Nations, we wish to share the efforts of the UN to promote gender equality and women, peace and security agenda through different approaches, including through strengthening managerial leadership and accountability, particularly on the implementation of the WPS mandates across US peacekeeping and further strengthening systems and mechanisms for monitoring progress and producing analytical evidence-based progress reports. We also commend the strengthening of capacities and knowledge of all personnel, civilian, police, and military, to advance the gender responsiveness of peacekeeping operations, as well as strengthening US peacekeeping engagements and partnerships with other UN entities and partners, internally and externally at headquarters and in missions, to achieve gender equality and WPS-related results. Allow me to conclude, Mr. President, with some concrete recommendations in line with the questions contained in these concept notes for this debate. First, we call on the UN to collaborate with regional organizations to provide in real-time transparent information on and about the level of women's involvement in peace negotiations and mediation processes. Second, we recommend that the Security Council's informal expert group on women, peace, and security should consider conducting field visits that focus on monitoring the situation of women and girls in the months or years after the withdrawal of large UN peace operations. In addition, the informal expert group on WPS can play a crucial role in the Security Council's assessment of the situation of women and girls, as well as gender issues on the ground, by providing expert insights, facilitating information exchange, and promoting a more comprehensive understanding of gender dynamics in conflict and post-conflict settings. It is our belief that this will positively contribute to shining a light on trends on women's rights and gender equality in transition contexts, which is much needed in these unpredictable and uncertain times. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Chile.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Feminist Foreign Policy Plus group, conformed by Albania, Argentina, Belgium, Canada, Colombia, Costa Rica, France, Germany, Israel, Liberia, Luxembourg, Mexico, Mongolia, Rwanda, Spain, the Netherlands, Tunisia, and my own country, Chile. We commend Brazil for convening this debate. Mr. President, since today we are discussing the practical implementation of Women, Peace and Security Agenda and its shortcomings, and inspired by Berta Lutz's push for gender equality in the UN Charter and beyond, we would like to share how feminist approaches can benefit the sustainability, long-term implementation, and impact of this agenda. How do we explain the gradual decline of the situation of all women, adolescents, and girls in conflict situations, while we have at our disposal the Rome Statute, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and the different provisions of international humanitarian and human rights law? The Secretary General report is clear in highlighting that national and regional commitments to the Women, Peace and Security Agenda have continued to grow, indicating sustained support over 2 decades for the agenda's normative framework. Therefore, we know that the issue is not the lack of frameworks or guidelines. What lacks is implementation on the ground. That is why we need to evaluate the extent of our political will and our methods of implementation to look at the problem differently. We should question what more can we do, or how can we act differently to make the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women, adolescents, and girls in all their diversity, and the eradication of all forms of violence and discrimination, including multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, a reality on the ground? How can we make sure that women equally, directly, and influentially participate in formal or high-level peace and political processes as a standard in conflict resolution, peacekeeping, and peace-building processes? How can we include diverse voices, including those of youth and LGBTI persons? For our group, a starting point would be to tackle the root causes of unequal power relations and structures which perpetuate cycles of violence that prolong and exacerbate conflicts. Military intervention alone, without rebuilding the social fabric at the grassroots level, would do very little to deliver long-term solutions for women and, by extension, society as a whole. We need to understand peace, not as the mere absence of violence and war, but rather grounded in an intersectional analysis of patriarchal system, gender stereotypes, and negative social norms, and the effects of unequal power relations as root causes of conflict. We note with concern the documented incidents of reprisals against women and girls, women human rights defenders, and civil society organizations for engaging with the United Nations. We thank and honor the women human rights defenders who bravely shared their testimonies before this Council, other UN mandates, and fight for women's rights on the ground. We are appalled that during last year, violation of women's human rights by conflict parties continued, whether it's different types of conflict-related sexual violence, including rape, threat of rape, sexual slavery, forced marriage, or gender persecution. We condemned, in the strongest terms, the use of sexual violence as a tactic of war. Nevertheless, we also need to remember that women and powerful agents of change are powerful agents of change and peace builders. Hence, it is imperative to foster local ownership of the women, peace, and security agenda and empower civil society by giving them the tools for building resilience, including with the adequate and flexible financial resources to do so. Let us ensure the Women, Peace and Security agenda remains a framework to protect and empower women and therefore steer away from dependency-generating approaches that take agency away from them. To that end, we would like to pose the following questions as part of a feminist analysis. For the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security framework, are we engaging enough with civil society and partners on the ground in a meaningful way and putting in place bottom-up decision-making mechanisms to place the needs of women and girls on the ground at the center of our policies? Are we doing enough capacity building also in our own ranks to ensure principles of the Women, Peace and Security agenda are adequately integrated by decision makers as a central strategy to prevent and resolve conflicts? Furthermore, we cannot forget that we are accountable to women all around the world who look up to this Council, at the very least, to protect them from the atrocities of war. We must reflect on the extent to which this Council is currently living up to this responsibility. How are we ensuring there are resources in place to ensure access to justice, including local reporting mechanisms? Are we implementing survivor-centered, trauma-informed approaches to respond to conflict-related violence, especially conflict-related sexual violence? Are we fighting impunity, including through international criminal proceedings, to strengthen the protection of women in conflict-affected countries? Lastly, we note that while the world's military spending reached an all-time high of $2.24 trillion in 2022, the Secretary General report flagged that no substantial progress has been made in increasing funding for women's organizations, including grassroots and feminist organizations, or the percentage of women in peace negotiations. Can we think of a more equitable distribution for such spending? The feminist approach of questioning and disrupting established structures and processes can show us the way and should accordingly be our guideline. Thank you, Mr. President. I will now say a few words in my national capacity. Señor Presidente,
President, we thank Brazil for convening this open debate, and we also thank the Secretary General and the briefers for their words and the background they provided us. We wish to recall that decisions about peace which do not include the voices, realities and rights of women are unsustainable when it comes to achieving the establishment of peace and keeping and building peace. The inclusion of women in these processes sheds light on needs which were previously not included. And in addition, these gender provisions have incalculable effects in the well-being of women living in conflict and post-conflict zones. The full, equal and significant participation of women continues to face significant limitations which are institutional and gender-based. Therefore, robust support is required from states, but in particular from this Council, for civil society organisations which are at the heart of the link between women, girls and peace. Likewise, the institutional frameworks must dismantle their patriarchal templates and recognise women as equals with their own voices and agency. There is currently a set of initiatives underway to encourage the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, in particular the participation of women, both at political and technical levels. And these bring together civil society organisations, academia, states and international organisations. We wish to underscore in particular the Network of Women Focal Points, which was created in 2016 and has allowed for closer cooperation between member states and created a space to regularly share and exchange lessons learned and best practices. This network is made up of 100 states and international bodies, which regularly meet to discuss how to implement Resolution 1325 and its 9 relevant resolutions in a more efficient way. President, Chile is applying to the ELSI Initiative Fund so as to compile comprehensive information which will allow us to carry out a full assessment of the barriers which exist in the armed forces to the participation of women in United Nations peace operations. This will allow us to take measures to eliminate these barriers and meet the needs that have been identified in order to increase the significant deployment in the armed forces of uniformed women in peace operations. We hope in this way to take decisive steps towards filling the vacuum in the national participation of women in international peace and security. It is worth recalling that achieving the Women, Peace and Security agenda is closely linked to the de-escalation of conflict. This is expressed through a rhetoric of peace and intangible actions to encourage disarmament and to reduce military budgets. Achieving tangible changes for local women and for the security of women journalists, parliamentarians, mediators, peacemakers and peace builders will mean eliminating physical violence and the threat of physical violence through firearms. There is no more valuable plan or measure to do this than achieving absolute control over small arms and light weapons so that the legitimate monopoly over violence is returned to the state as the only guarantor of collective security. Over recent years, we've seen an increase in military budgets and private spending on small arms and light weapons, without this spending having any correlation in increased security for women, as we can see in the last report of the Secretary-General. Just like 23 years ago, the call now is for disarmament, prioritising policies of development, inclusion and protection so that women can live in spaces free of violence and in societies where they can enjoy full, effective and significant participation. Women, President, want peace.
I thank the representative of Chile for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Myanmar.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Myanmar thanks the Presidency of Brazil for organizing this important open debate. I also thank the Secretary General and other briefers for their insightful briefings. The role and contribution of women in promoting and maintaining peace and security at the national and international level has long been recognized. There is widespread international support for women's equal and meaningful participation at all decision-making levels in prevention, management, and resolution of conflicts. However, nearly 25 years after the adoption of Resolution 1325, the international community still has much more to do to translate these theoretical and rhetorical supports into on-ground realities across the world. Conflicts are intensifying in many parts of the world. Women's rights are under growing attacks. Their marginalization in peace and security processes still persists. Impunity for violence against women and girls, especially rape and other forms of sexual violence, is still a major challenge to the implementation of the WPS agenda. Mr. President, in my country, Myanmar, women have been at the forefront of the resistance to the illegal military coup, from peaceful demonstrations to civil disobedience movement to assumption of key leadership responsibilities in the National Unity Government. Women human rights defenders and CSO leaders played an instrumental role in reporting the military junta atrocities and responding to humanitarian needs on the ground across the country. The military forces deploy rape and other forms of sexual violence as part of their widespread and systematic attack on the civilian population in order to weaken the opposition to their illegal coup. So far, a total of 613 women have been killed and nearly 5,000 women being arrested by the military since the coup in February 2021. The military junta's atrocities are well documented by the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar that sexual and gender-based violence is a hallmark of military's operations. Despite all these personal security risks, Myanmar women's participation in the resistance against the illegal coup and for peace, democracy, and human rights have not weakened. In fact, they are a key driving force of the ongoing movement to end the illegal military's attempted coup and establish a peaceful Myanmar with federal democratic governance based on the rule of law and justice. Mr. President, we are beyond the conflict prevention stage in Myanmar. The illegal military coup and their campaign of brutal violence against the people have already thrown the country into the current multifaceted crisis. The focus now is on finding a sustainable solution. At this juncture, there is an opportunity and necessity for the implementation of the WPS agenda in Myanmar. We must make sure that women's full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation is integral to our ongoing efforts towards the sustainable resolution. The regional and international community has a crucial role to play in this regard. First, we must address the civilian protection crisis in Myanmar. This includes protecting women and girls from sexual violence and other serious crimes, particularly in conflict areas. While there is no domestic environment for effective accountability for conflict-related sexual violence, the UN Security Council should take concrete actions to end military impunity for serious international crimes, including rape and sexual violence in Myanmar. Second, we must support women's organizations and civil society groups advocating for women's rights, peace, and democracy. Their voices should be heard. In particular, I appeal to our neighbors and third countries to support and provide safety to Myanmar women, including civil servants and journalists who fled from the junta's ceaseless persecutions. Third, women's organizations and leaders, including human rights defenders, peace builders, must be among the key stakeholders, not only in the resolution of the current conflict, but also in the post-conflict governance and peace building in Myanmar. In conclusion, Mr. President, I call on the Security Council to take decisive actions to create conditions for a sustainable solution to the current crisis in Myanmar. And I encourage the Council to include the WPS implementation as part of its response. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Myanmar for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank His Excellency, Ambassador Mauro Vieira, for convening this important debate on the anniversary of Resolution 1325. I also thank the Secretary General and the briefers that we heard the other day for their insights. Mr. President, the role of women in peace and security is determined daily, as evident in the frequent gendered violence that countless girls and women face, especially in armed conflict where sexual assault is often weaponized. The current crisis in Israel and the Gaza Strip is only the latest example of such gendered impacts. The terrorist attacks by Hamas have severely harmed Israeli women in ways too distressing to detail here. Our deepest sympathies go to the victims and survivors of such violence. We unequivocally condemn this terrorism and acknowledge Israel's right to defend its citizens against Hamas's actions. UN agencies on the ground in Gaza report an extensive humanitarian emergency. The Population Fund estimates that 50,000 women in Gaza are presently pregnant, with 5,500 anticipated to deliver next month. Alongside other civilians, these women face significant hardships due to ongoing military operations. They are often deprived of safe birthing services, vital supplies, and essentials like protection from airstrikes, food, and water. Immediate unhindered humanitarian access is imperative to address the pressing need of girls and women in Gaza. As the crisis escalates, it is essential for the voices and stories of mothers and daughters to be heard and valued. Women are too often portrayed in media mainly as victims, sidelining their roles as leaders or decision makers. This very marginalization spurred the creation of Resolution 1325 nearly 25 years ago. The WPS agenda can champion the inclusion of women's perspectives in national and global dialogues concerning security, reconciliation, and justice. Such an approach fosters unity in recognizing the shared challenges girls and women encounter across divisive boundaries. There's a pressing demand for forums that promote dialogue, education, activism, and policy making. These spaces can bolster collaborative networks that accentuate women's voices, paving the way for their impactful roles in justice, accountability, peace building, and decision making in both Israel and Palestine. In conclusion, Mr. President, the war between Israel and Hamas disrupts a status quo that was unacceptable to Kenya, which understands the Palestinian yearning for independence and sovereignty. It was unacceptable to us who sympathize with Israel's constant vigilance against existential threats. The path forward requires a renewed dedication to a peace process that rejects terrorism as an acceptable form of resistance and steers to a two-state solution. Without women's insights and interests at the core of discussions with Israel, Palestine, and the primary regional and global stakeholders, we jeopardize the potential for enduring peace and risk further calamity. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Kenya for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. 24 years have passed since the adoption of 1325 at the Security Council, and we are still witnessing heinous crimes against women and girls, such as the one committed by Hamas terror organization on October 7th in Israel. The testimonies, forensic reports, and videos taken by the terrorists themselves all show the brutal gender and sexual-based violence, including rape and femicide. These paint an undeniable, grim picture of the reality of the international community has failed to prevent. How am I to speak about the participation of women and girls in peace and security when the women and girls in my country were the target, and I emphasize, intentionally targeted in attacks that amount to international war crimes and crimes against humanity? Mr. President, regrettably, despite the need to fight violations of human rights of women and girls, the need to take action against perpetrators of conflict-related sexual violence, and the need to create safe, secure, and enabling environments for women peace builders and human rights defenders, the international community has failed to do so. Impunity for atrocities against women and girls remain prevalent. The systematic bias against the State of Israel is again lifting its head, this time at the expense of innocent lives. There must not be place for double standards within the United Nations halls. We recall resolutions 1820 and 1325 of the Council and call upon the international community, in particular the Security Council, to immediately and unequivocally condemn the war crimes and the crimes against humanity committed against innocent women and girls in Israel by the jihadist terror organization of Hamas, and call for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages held in Gaza. We further call upon the international community to do justice for the victims and survivors of the October 7th atrocities by bringing the perpetrators to justice. Therefore, we call upon the Security Council to include sexual violence as a designation criteria as part of the Sanctions Committee, and to unanimously designate Hamas as a terror organization, as was done against ISIS. Hamas is ISIS. The horrific, barbaric, and brutal massacre of October 7th attests to their genocidal ideology. Designating Hamas as a terror organization would constitute one step forward in the global fight against impunity and therefore in our collective effort to implement the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Israel for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would like to thank the President of Brazil for convening the open debate on this very important topic. We concur with the Secretary General's remarks in his report that the full, equal, meaningful participation of women in building and sustaining peace should be the norm and not an afterthought. Converting the provisions of 1325 and subsequent Council's resolutions into action would enable women to contribute with their unique insights to achieving durable peace. Adopting a gender perspective that incorporates the specific needs of women and girls during the post-conflict recovery efforts and engagement of women in these activities is essential to repair the social fabric of a conflict-affected society. This is also relevant to our region emerging out of the 3 decades-long armed conflict. Mr. President, as reaffirmed in the concept note, this debate also provides a good opportunity to reflect on the implementation of core commitments, including on respect for international law applicable to the protection of women and girls in armed conflict. Although international law and standards have significantly developed over the years, women and children account for the vast majority of those adversely affected by armed conflict and hate-driven violence. Non-compliance by states with their international obligations and the lack of accountability for violations of international humanitarian and human rights law continue to remain a serious challenge. It is important that Council persistently reiterates its demand for strict compliance with international obligations and the end of impunity for serious violations. Mr. President, we are particularly concerned about the fate of women and girls taken hostage or reported missing in connection with armed conflict. Such situations put them at high risk of exploitation, abuse, trafficking, and other forms of breach of their rights. Regretfully, in the past 3 decades, women and girls in Azerbaijan have experienced firsthand the devastating effects of the occupation of our territories by Armenia. One of the most tragic consequences of the conflict are around 4,000 citizens of Azerbaijan, including 267 women who are still missing because of the conflict. It was established that 98 of those women were taken as hostages. Although they were seen alive during captivity, their whereabouts are still unknown. We expect that Armenia will shed light on the fates of missing persons of Azerbaijan and bring to justice those responsible for their disappearance. Azerbaijan continues its efforts to raise awareness on this problem at the international level, including through presenting resolutions at the General Assembly and the Commission on the Status of Women, on Missing Persons, and on women and children taken hostage in armed conflicts. In conclusion, Mr. President, we once again reiterate that Azerbaijan will continue to advance empowerment of women and support their participation in 4 pillars of women, peace, and security agenda. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Azerbaijan for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Mr. President, at the outset, let me thank Brazil for convening this important open debate on the very crucial subject of women's participation in international peace and security. Mr. President, women are agents of social change and social cohesion. It is now universally acknowledged that achievement of gender equality and empowerment of women are critical factors in maintaining international peace and security. Sustainable peace requires an integrated approach based on coherence between the pillars of security, development, human rights, rule of law, and equality. In this context, UNSC Resolution 1325 was path-breaking, as for the first time, it linked gender equality and the maintenance of international peace and security. It also recognized women's participation as being a key to resolving conflicts and securing peace. Mr. President, over the years, we have seen a strengthening of the normative framework of the WPS agenda. However, in spite of that, women are still routinely underrepresented in peace processes, political dialogues, and peace building. The gender perspective is still neglected in conflict prevention, recovery, and reconstruction. For example, out of the approximately 95,000 peacekeepers, women constitute only 4.8% of military contingents and 10.9% of formed police units in UN peacekeeping missions. It is essential that we increase the representation of female peacekeepers in UN peacekeeping operations in order to achieve sustainable peace and the improved well-being of women and girls in conflict-afflicted regions. Mr. President, as the UN's fifth largest troop contributor, India created history in 2007 by deploying the first ever all-female formed police unit for UN peacekeeping mission in Liberia. Indian female peacekeepers are playing an important mentoring role to prevent conflict-related sexual violence. We are proud that Major Suman Gavani was awarded the UN Military Gender Advocate for the year 2019. India was the first country to contribute to the Secretary General's Trust Fund in support of victims of sexual exploitation and abuse, and also signed the Voluntary Compact on SEA with the Secretary General in 2017. Mr. President, we believe that enhanced participation of women is crucial in ensuring peace and security in society. With this in mind, women in India are being encouraged to be at the forefront of community mobilization and public-government interface. In September this year, India took a historic step towards gender equality when the Indian Parliament passed the Women's Reservation Bill to reserve 1/3 of all seats in national and state legislatures for women. More than 1.5 million women now stand empowered to participate in all political decision-making processes at the national, regional, and local levels. India stands fully committed to contribute and implement the UN agenda on women, peace, and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of India for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lithuania aligns itself with the statement of the EU and would like to add the following remarks in its national capacity. This year we mark the 23rd anniversary of the landmark UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Women, peace and security agenda plays an essential role in furthering women's effective, equal, meaningful and full participation and leadership in conflict prevention, peace building and political process. However, the gap between global commitments set out in the Resolution 1325 and 9 Security Council's resolutions on women, peace and security is deepening due to persisting unstable global situation. While the world marks the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in some parts of the world, those rights are brutally violated. Lithuania condemns Hamas in its extensive and inhumane terrorist attacks across Israel, and we mourn the loss of lives. At this time, our thoughts are with all the innocent victims whose lives were irreparably affected. Lithuania is appalled by the Taliban's deliberate and systematic repression of women and girls in Afghanistan. The ban on Afghan women from working for NGOs and the UN-led organizations critically impacts the delivery of basic services and humanitarian assistance. In addition, Taliban continues to restrict education of girls, which results in unequal possibilities for girls and their dependents in the future. In Sudan, women and girls became subject to gender-based violence, including sexual violence. As the conflict is ongoing, women and girls have to fight every day to have an access to the life-saving reproductive health and protection services. Russia's brutal, illegal, and unprovoked military aggression against Ukraine has a tremendous toll on the dire humanitarian situation, which disproportionately affects women and girls. We recall that in the Resolution 1325, it is enshrined that all parties to armed conflicts should take special measures to protect women and girls from gender-based violence, particularly rape and other forms of sexual abuse. We reiterate that Russia should be brought to justice for the gruesome acts of torture, sexual violence against Ukrainian women and girls, amounting to war crimes, including forcible transfers and deportations of Ukrainian children to Russian-occupied areas or to Russian Federation, Belarus, and the illegal adoption there. Russia must pay all the damages caused by its war. Victims deserve justice and redress. Mr. President, Lithuania remains committed to the implementation of Women, Peace and Security agenda nationally, as well as support and promote its implementation internationally. Lithuania has been continuously supporting the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund since its launch in 2016. Furthermore, we actively cooperate with the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict. Just last week, Special Representative Pramila Patten visited Lithuania, where she participated in international regional discussion on how to ensure an effective protection, assistance, and prevention systems for survivors of sexual violence in conflict-related contexts. We encourage all member states to maintain an enabling and safe environment for women's full, equal, and meaningful participation and leadership in political peace-building and conflict prevention processes. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Lithuania for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Andorra.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. We'd like to congratulate you on your presidency. And thank you also for this debate and the concept note. Also, we are grateful to the Secretary-General for his report. And we would also like to thank the briefers, Executive Director of UN Women, the President of the ICRC, and Ambassador of Brazil, and representative of Brazil also at the Colombia Dialogue table. And also thanks to civil society for their helpful contributions. Andorra aligns itself with a statement made by the European Union, and we would like to make the following comments in our national capacity. President, we welcome the themes of this debate: the participation of women, respect for international law, gender and women's rights issues at the Security Council. Indeed, the protection and promotion of women's rights and their leadership in conflict situations and humanitarian emergencies is a sine qua non for peace and sustainable development. Also, we can't build peace and sustainable development where violence reigns. More specifically, if impunity for sexual and gender-based violence related to conflicts prevails. Granted, as the Secretary-General underscores in his document, A New Agenda for Peace, and I quote, new, that we, this means government, the United Nations, and all sectors of society, we must respond and take specific measures to call into question and transform gender norms, value systems, and institutional structures which perpetuate exclusion or the status quo. In this connection, one of Andorra's priorities is to promote women's participation in all aspects of political life. Education, which is a right, a necessity, and an SDG, helps to lay the foundations for building equality and cooperation. These convictions, President, have been supported by our government, which is made up of more women than men, and also by our parliament, where parity amongst elected representatives happens practically at every election held since 2011 without any quotas or obligations in place. President, peace and security define our world. Giving space for women has a multiplying effect for the lasting peace and progress of projects, much like in Colombia. But currently, the spread of conflicts in the context of threats and challenges mean that we find ourselves at a critical juncture. As the resolutions from the Women, Peace and Security agenda show, particularly the most recent report of the Secretary-General, we do have a legal and normative framework that is solid to guarantee the full and complete participation of women on equal footing, ensure that stakeholders to a conflict prevent violations of women's rights, and ensure that sexual and gender-based violence be prevented and prosecuted. But its complete and effective implementation remains a challenge. We welcome the initiatives of the Secretary General, such as last year's launch of the Prevention Framework for Conflict-Related Sexual Violence, and also the legal guidebook on state obligations for conflict-related sexual violence. President, Andorra supports initiatives that seek to increase women's leadership in peace and security. We joined the Action for Peacekeeping initiative, and we are encouraged by the progress made so far. As envisaged in the Secretary-General's strategy, the Uniformed Gender Parity Strategy for 2018 to 2028. In addition, as a member of the Francophonie, Andorra supports capacity-building initiatives of the OIF for the promotion of gender equality. The participation of women is crucial at all states of this complex state, which is peace and security. This is a commitment that we have all committed to. Thank you very much.
The representative of Andorra for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I wish to express appreciation to Brazil for convening this open debate. Secretary General Guterres stated in his report that women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in building peace is still an aspiration or an afterthought. This pronouncement comes 23 years after the adoption of Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, and later resolutions which collectively comprise a strong framework on WPS. At this time, when WPS is prominent on the agenda of the Council, amplified by the introduction of the shared commitments, which have seen successive presidencies of the Council highlight key aspects of the agenda, we still have more to do. Despite this high visibility and activism, progress has been minimal. Indeed, it is clear that the focus must be on implementation. While representing at least half of those affected by armed conflicts, women are still excluded from conflict prevention and resolution. As a result, the unique challenges faced by women and girls and their relief needs are often not addressed. Mr. President, as our world continues to groan under increased armed conflicts and horrific humanitarian crises, women and children are the primary victims. Their human rights are trampled upon daily, and their lives seem without value. Sexual and gender-based violence continues to be prevalent. It is alarming that the number of women and girls living in conflict-affected countries is reported at 614 million in 2022, 50% higher than that number of 2017. The Security Council must continue to insist that reports on country situations include substantial information, data, and analysis on the situation of women and girls. Parties to conflicts must be urged to take special measures to protect women and girls from all forms of violence. Those who have committed atrocities against women and girls cannot be allowed to escape with impunity. It is also necessary that peace agreements have a gender perspective. Mr. President, there must be a shift from rhetoric to setting specific, concrete targets against which progress can be measured. Guyana welcomes the Secretary General's commitment for the UN to support an initial minimum target of 1/3 of participants in mediation and peace processes to be women. We agree with the assessment in the report that member states and other international organizations must use their political and financial capital and their level of influence to advance women, peace, and security. In Guyana, our defense force is committed to the implementation of the WPS agenda and to bridging the leadership gaps at all levels throughout the force, creating equal opportunities for women. This includes professional development opportunities and providing an environment for women to comfortably serve in the military. An awareness campaign is being used to promote the agenda in the force. As a result of these efforts, there has been some increase in Guyana in the number of women at leadership levels in our force. Mr. President, change is possible, but we must act. Let us commit to moving away from theory to practice, ensuring that women are equally and meaningfully included in peace processes, humanitarian responses, and in post-conflict reconstruction. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Cambodia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellency, distinguished delegate, first, I would like to express my appreciation to you, Mr. President, for convening today's crucial debate on women's participation in international peace and security from theory to practices. I also would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the Secretary General, the briefer, the previous speaker for their insightful remarks. Cambodia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the esteemed representative of Vietnam on behalf of ASEAN. And now allow me to speak in my own national capacity. Mr. President, the significant role of women in various sectors, notably the socio-economic scope, has been recognized for many years. Yet it is only after the adoption of the Council Resolution 1325 that women's roles and contribution to the peace and security have been acknowledged. Thanks to this resolution, it's widely recognized women's significant contribution to conflict resolution and sustainable peace. However, there are some cases where women may struggle to contribute to their society due to lack of opportunity. Thus, my delegation urges all member states to fully empower women by implementation national policy and strategy. And it is important that we translated our commitment into concrete action. In this regard, Cambodia is proud to share our progress toward enhancing women's participation across all sectors. This includes prominent positions in the public sector, such as the President of the National Assembly of Cambodia being a woman and an increased number of female ministers equal to 10% of women in our newly formed government announced last August. Mr. President, Cambodia, a nation that cherishes peace, has transformed itself from a host country to an active contributor to the UN peacekeeping operation since 2006, deploying 9,205 troops, including 728 women, to countries in Africa, Middle East, and Europe. Cambodia's commitment is never limited to promoting the vital role of women in leadership, peace, and security. In 2022, Cambodia ranked 12 among 121 troops contributing countries and second among ASEAN countries regarding the number of women peacekeepers deployed. Currently, Cambodia deploys 903 troops, of which 148 are women. Thus, the number equals 16.42%, exceeding the UN limit of 15%. We are also proud to share another milestone, is the adoption of the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on Women, Peace and Security at the 40th and 41st ASEAN Summit in Cambodia in December 2022. This aim is to galvanize ASEAN to advance the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda to promote sustainable peace and security for all citizens and to boost the four pillars of women participation, namely protection, prevention, and relief and recovery from conflicts. To conclude, allow me to reiterate Cambodia's strong commitment to implementing the Women, Peace and Security Agenda for the sake of humanity. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Cambodia for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Venezuela.
Señor Presidente.
President, although our Latin American and Caribbean region is not involved in armed conflicts, it does face other forms of systemic aggression, such as political destabilization, foreign interventionism, and unilateral coercive measures, with all of the devastating consequences that these bring with them, principally affecting women and girls, as well as potentially vulnerable populations. For Venezuela, advancing towards a society which is definitively equal and a society of women's rights is an absolute political priority. not only in the areas of participation, protagonism, and political decision-making, but also in the role it plays in shoring up the social fabric and the active role in conflict prevention and resolution at various stages, as well as in peacekeeping and peacebuilding. This policy must also be a priority and must be cross-cutting throughout the agendas of multilateral and regional organizations such as the United Nations. President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has repeatedly expressed in numerous international fora its condemnation of the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures. These measures are a multidimensional weapon of war with a flagrant impact on human rights, financial systems, humanitarian assistance, trade chains, information and communication technologies, access to universal health care, education, and other critical infrastructure systems which are essential for development and for sustaining any state. One of the most damaging results of this cruel and dehumanizing policy is its impact on the political stability of states and in the backsliding of progress already made, particularly the rights of women and girls, as well as internal destabilization, trafficking and smuggling of migrants by mafias, and the commodification of humanitarian assistance, where it is seen as a business. This is an undeniable fact and must be halted. The only result of such action is instability, poverty, and exclusion, which means even more exclusion for women and girls from their fundamental rights. This is why we demand that they be lifted immediately. President, allow us to underscore the fact that a real policy for women, peace and security will not be real, nor legitimate, nor complete for as long as Palestinian women are under the yoke of an occupying power, the government of Israel. With the current siege in Gaza, this has caused thousands of victims, including women and girls. There are bombings which do not discriminate between gender, social class, political belief, nor age, whilst cutting short the future of the afflicted Palestinian people. Peace efforts must have women as protagonists, but above all, the military attack of the occupying power, the government of Israel, must cease, and there must once again be a true effort for peace. President, finally, Venezuela wishes to take this opportunity to reaffirm our unequivocal condemnation of sexual exploitation and abuse in all United Nations bodies, including contexts of peacekeeping and peace building, as well as our full support for the zero-tolerance policy with regard to such crimes and the urgency of bringing their perpetrators to justice. Venezuela's foreign policy remains committed to decisively combating the feminization of poverty and the exclusion of women from decision-making processes and public policy. Women's leadership in the processes of development, transformation, emancipation and pacification is an inevitable path, which we must pursue to its proper destination, and this compels us to work for its definitive consolidation. Despite the complexity of this path and the many competing global powers and ideologies, Venezuela will continue to seek to build this ideal and make it a reality for the rights of women and for the inclusion of all. Thank you very much, President.
I thank the representative of Venezuela for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Cyprus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me to thank you for organizing this very important debate and express our appreciation to all the briefers for the insightful presentations and recommendations. My statement will be complementing that of the European Union, to which Cyprus fully subscribes. 23 years have elapsed since the unanimous adoption of Security Council Resolution 1325. This was a historic moment, taking into consideration that this breakthrough resolution affirmed the importance of gender perspectives in peace negotiations, peacekeeping operations, peace building, and post-conflict governance. 2 years before the milestone 25th anniversary of the adoption of Resolution 1325, it is crucial to assess what we have achieved, but mostly where we need to be by 2025. Women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in peace processes and decision-making structures should not be just an aspiration, but a prerequisite for sustainable peace. Since 2000, important progress has been achieved in the Women, Peace and Security agenda. However, the sad reality is that we are now witnessing major pushbacks against women's and girls' rights across the world. As more women and girls are coming in the spotlight because of the WPS agenda, the number of attacks and reprisals against them is on the rise. We must ensure that participation of women in the WPS agenda is not only full, equal, and meaningful, but also safe. It is our common responsibility to ensure zero tolerance to any form of attack, intimidation, or reprisal against women and girls for their participation in political life, their work on human rights and humanitarian affairs, their peace-building activities, as well as their cooperation with the UN mechanisms. In this regard, Cyprus notes with concern that, as recorded in the latest report of the UN Secretary-General on Women, Peace and Security, widespread attacks against women human rights defenders in conflict-affected settings still continues. It is Cyprus's firm belief that civil society organizations serve the cause of peace, security, and prosperity at local, international, and national level. In the face of unprecedented challenges around the world, it is our common responsibility to ensure that women and women-led grassroots organizations have the funding and operational capacities to participate in the full spectrum of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. For this reason, Cyprus has responded to the call of the UN Secretary-General and will voluntarily contribute to the UN Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund Invest in Women campaign for the period 2023-2025, with the aim of supporting women's organizations and human rights defenders in crisis situations. Undeniably, women and girls pay the highest price in conflict situations. Global repercussions, including the gender dimensions and the impact of climate-related risks on peace and security and the gender gap in food security, are not an exception. These challenges are gravely impacting the most vulnerable. Cyprus believes that women and girls' roles in building peace and stability in post-conflict situations and peace processes goes beyond the issue of gender equality. Their participation is catalytic to the efforts to achieve lasting peace and prosperous societies. Ensuring inclusive implementation of peace agreements is a sine qua non to overcome the fragility of these situations. Mr. President, the Women, Peace and Security agenda is arguably one of the most recognizable agendas of the Security Council, not just because it acknowledges the role of women, but because it proves that there is no peace without women. It is therefore our collective responsibility to enhance our efforts in achieving the full implementation of Resolution 1325 and to adopt gender-sensitive approaches to create a more peaceful and prosperous world for all. Now is the moment to translate our commitment to action. I thank you.
Thank the representative of Cyprus for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Angola.
Mr. President, Excellency members of the Security Council, distinguished delegates, allow me to begin by praising the leadership of the Federative Republic of Brazil in conducting the work of its presidency of the Security Council in an international context of great challenges to international peace and security, in which, unfortunately, women and children are the main victims. I would like to express the importance of this annual open debate on women, peace and security. Angola has been following the efforts of UN Secretary General to achieve gender parity of the United Nations, for which we congratulate and encourage him. Mr. President, Resolution 1325 reaffirms the importance of promoting gender parity in all phases of peace building and security processes. It is about recognizing the specific impacts that the contemporary conflicts and situations of insecurity have on lives of women and girls around the world, and the efforts needed to mitigate and minimize them. The documents highlight the importance of equal participation and the full involvement of women in efforts to maintain and promote peace and security, as well as the need to increase their roles in the decision-making process to prevent and resolve conflicts and enhance their participation in peace operations. In this sense, these resolutions create an international political basis that emphasizes that gender parity in conflict prevention, management, and resolution is a transversal to all phases of peace-building process in countries in conflict and or emerging from it, as well as countries at peace, such as Angola. After 23 years, women in multiple countries remain either underrepresented or underrepresented in decision-making process, are prominent challenges to the full implementation of the Resolution 1325. Excellencies, Angola has been playing an important role in conflict prevention, management, and resolution, as well as promoting peace and democracy in Africa, especially in the Great Lakes region, through diplomatic initiatives to promote permanent political dialogue, building mutual trust and cooperation that promotes inclusive economic growth, prosperity, and the common good. Angolan's foreign policy on peace and security is built on its own national experience and commitment to permanent promotion of national reconciliation, social unity and cohesion, the strengthening of democracy and the rule of law. Cognizant of the equal impact that conflicts have on women and men and the need for women's greater participation and inclusion of the gender equality dimension in conflict prevention, management, and resolution process, the government of Angola adopted in 2017 the Angolan National Action Plan for the implementation of Resolution 1325. The main objective was to enhance coordination and to make various programs in the integration of women in defense, internal security, and cooperation policies more effective and pragmatic. The plan aims to increase women's participation in the decision-making process and their full involvement in all efforts to maintain and promote peace and security in the country. On the other hand, it also intends to contribute to eradication of violations of women's human rights in conflict situations, including sexual violence and women and children trafficking. As a result of the implementation of the national plan, women have been playing an increasingly important leading role in Angola's peace and security initiatives to silence the guns in Africa. It has contributed to a fair representation of women in decision-making bodies. They currently have a presence of 38% in the parliament and 40% in the government, being responsible for political sensitive portfolios such as finance, labor, health, youth, education, and social affairs. Furthermore, the position of the President of Parliament, the Vice President of the Republic, and the President of the Constitutional Court are also held by women. Last May, Angola hosted the first International Women's Forum for Peace and Democracy, which represented an opportunity to reflect on how to advance the stability and sustainable development agenda and strengthen the rule of law in Africa, with greater involvement of women on mediation and conflict resolution initiatives. It will also serve to renew our common commitment to foster gender equality and empowerment of women and girls and eradication of violence, key priorities of the government of Angola within the framework of the implementation of Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. Mr. President, in an international context of great challenges, we need to prioritize multilateralism as a way of reaching consensus on the preservation of international peace and security, the promotion of sustainable development, and the defense of human rights. To this end, we must increase women's participation and incorporate gender perspective in all our peace and security efforts. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Angola for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Mr. Mauro Vieira, Foreign Minister of the Federative Republic of Brazil, for holding this important debate on women, peace and security. I would also like to thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres and Her Excellency Dr. Sima Bahous, Executive Director of UN Women. I would also like to thank all other briefers for their valuable remarks. Mr. President, we're approaching the 25th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, which provides for the equal participation of women in decision-making and their participation in conflict prevention, peace building and sustaining peace. Continued threats to global peace and the negative trends we're experiencing undermine the gains achieved in women's rights and prevent the achievement of gender equality and global peace. In his last report on women, peace and security, which focused on ensuring the participation of women in peacemaking, peacekeeping and peace building, the Secretary General focused on the need to invest in implementing the commitments on women, peace and security. Mr. President, under the leadership of His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, the King of Bahrain, may God protect him, and with the support of His Royal Highness Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, Crown Prince and Prime Minister, may God protect him, the Kingdom of Bahrain remains committed to international obligations on women, peace and security, including Resolution 1325. The Kingdom is committed to all efforts to advance the women, peace and security agenda. We focus on global peace, comprehensive peace, to implement the women, peace and security agenda, and we focus on its link to sustainable development. The High Women's Council, chaired by Her Royal Highness Princess Sabika bint Ibrahim Al Khalifa, the King's wife, may God protect her. Through this council, the Kingdom of Bahrain was able to make a qualitative and sustainable impact on gender equality. And we were able to share successful national experiences and best practices at regional and international levels. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain stresses that all parties to armed conflicts must abide by international law, especially those provisions related to women's rights and the protection of women, especially the provisions that apply to parties to the conflict, including the Geneva Conventions of 1949, its additional protocol of 1977, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women of 1977, the Refugee Convention of 1951, and its 1967 protocol. The Middle East is going through serious challenges with painful humanitarian dimensions. Most of the victims are women and children. Against this background, the Kingdom of Bahrain calls for an immediate ceasefire, ending military operations, and provide protections to all innocent civilians from both sides, the Palestinian and Israeli sides, and release all prisoners, those captured, to also facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid, food, water, fuel, electricity into Gaza under international law to alleviate the humanitarian disaster that affects too many Palestinians. In conclusion, Mr. President, we reaffirm our support to all international effort to ensure gender equality in the development and humanitarian fields and to enhance the contribution of women to peace and security at all levels. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for their statement. The representative of Algeria has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. We ask for the floor to make an additional statement to reply to the representative of Morocco. The statement by Morocco is very surprising because Algeria's statement did not address the situation of women in Morocco. not even remotely. We will not reply to the lies contained in this statement. This statement shows the deterioration that we're seeing in Morocco. From this rostrum, I would like to stress the following points. One, we cannot address today's topic, women, peace and security, without speaking of women languishing under the yoke of occupation. From this rostrum, we salute all women that resist colonialism and resistance, especially that resist colonialism and injustice, especially in Western Sahara and Palestine. Sahrawi women, whether Morocco approves or not approves, has a strong presence. The Sahrawi people is suffering from colonialism that deprived him of all rights. Despite the suffering of Sahrawi women under occupation, women are still fighting for their inalienable rights that are imprescriptible, especially the right to self-determination. Second, the practices of the occupation and the violations of human rights by the occupation. The practices by the occupation are completely condemned and completely rejected. They have been documented by the Secretary General's report, especially the latest report presented to the Secretary General. This report is the latest of the reports, and there are so many. They confirm the deteriorating human rights situation in Western Sahara. These are facts that cannot be denied. They paint a bleak picture of the situation of Sahrawi women. In conclusion, no one can take away from us the right to defend peoples languishing under occupation. The Sahrawi people is an occupied people, despite those that try to falsify the facts. This is a reality, as the Secretary General has stated in his latest